Fog lay in the cut like unspun wool, and Reverend Josiah Oakes counted his steps from the clapboard church to the tipple, 300 yards by his stride. He liked distances. They steadied the mind. The creek beside the tramway moved with slow black polish, and he noted the hour, 10 before 5 by his nickel watch. Men gathered under the tipple roof, caps low, lunch pails clacking. Foreman Pike called the roll, and each man dropped his brass token into the checkbox before the cage. No. 17, number 42, number 6 proof for later, if proof were required. Oakes gave them the decency of a nod. He did not lead a prayer. Miners prefer routine to mercy before sunup. Mr. Vale arrived with a hat one shade darker than his coat and the neat look of a man who keeps paper where other men keep knives. His ledger rode in his inner pocket so smooth it had made a shape there. Oakes passed among the men with his small bottle of consecrated oil, said, "The Lord keep your measure," and counted the first 6 into the cage. The drum took the load with a familiar groan. Men vanished into the shaft's cool. The second set went down. The third. Routine sat warm in the bones. At 6 by his watch, the end of Ray's whistle should have jolted the hills, but the drum only muttered and fell still. Oakes lifted his head. The creak's sound replaced what the drum should have been, and that trade was wrong. Pike signaled the tender for a test raise. The cage came half a man's height and stopped with a wet clank. "Brakes clean," the tender said, unconvinced. Mrs. Luann Hart stood on the second rail, chin high, eyes on the shaft mouth. "They're late," she said without hysteria. A boy, Jesse, Pike's runner, brought up fresh wedges and looked down the shaft, then away quickly, as if the dark had looked back. The cage dropped again and did not come up at its mark. The drum did not answer the tender's hand. A guard at the gate lifted his whistle and gave one sharp blast. The code for hold. By 9, the fog had thinned to a bright smear, and the cage drum had not regained its voice. A little breath of powder smoke came up from the shaft and thinned before it declared itself. Pike waved the boiler man to hold his steam and tested the drum. The cage rose no more than a boy's height and fell back. Mr. Vale arrived with a folded sheet and handed it to Pike with the sadness you keep for other people's misfortunes. The paper bore neat type. By order of company and judge's hand, shaft sealed for safety pending assessment. Vale produced a second leaf, the printed notice already cut to nail. "There will be relief script at the store," he said. "Safety looks like boards," Luann said. Not a shout, a sentence. Pike read twice and gave the sheet to Oakes, who read aloud, "Sealed pending assessment." He tried not to hear the emptiness where a time should follow. Jesse came at a run. "Preacher," he said, "at prayers under the first hymn, raps, 3, then 2, and twice again." Oakes marked the intervals against his watch and wrote them. Rap set, 3 gap 5 seconds, 2 gap 7. "Air," the boiler man said, meaning the house's ordinary complaints. "Not air," Jesse answered. "Under us." Oakes walked the counted paces and felt it again in the ribs, not the ears. A tap met by wood, not iron. Vale had a nail pouch ready. He passed a handful to a deputy with the printed notice and gestured to the timbers. "We'll make fast. Men inside will do better if we do not confuse the air with drafts and talk." "Men inside will do better with a cage," Luann said. Pike stood as if the seam map in his head had turned a troubling page. "Judge's hand is wet," he said to Oakes quietly. "You feel the ink still?" He meant the hurry in the notice, the way a letter can arrive before the horse sweats. The boiler coughed and went silent. Then the raps came again. 3, 2. Not frantic, not strong. A man will send you his courage before he sends fear. Sealing begins, Vale said, and the deputies laid timbers across the mouth with method that avoided eye contact. Vale produced his second paper, the injunction proper, and folded it with decisive control. Behind the boiler house, the faint tapping ceased as if listening. Toward evening, Oakes stood in the lamp room door where lanterns hung on hooks in neat rows. Below them, the helmet rack waited like pews after a funeral. He began with the plainest work he knew, names in a column. "Call them," Luann Hart said. She stood with one hand on a dented lunch pail, as if warmth could be coaxed from tin. Oakes read off helmets and tokens, and Luann answered with husbands, sons, brothers. Token 17. Hart, Eli, she answered. Token 6. Peabody, John. He kept the hour and weather beside the names, trusting margins to take what a body could not yet say. Jesse came with a coal pencil. "Should I mark tapping, Reverend?" "Mark where you heard it and the intervals we set. We will not lose count." At the tipple, a guard posted Vale's notice. Sealed for safety pending assessment. Vale moved among the women with borrowed ministerial courtesy, murmuring relief and store credit while distributing script chits. "Relief will not raise a cage," Luann said, eyes on the seal boards. Pike shifted and unfolded a corner of his map. "There is an old entry," he said to Oakes. "Cut off when the company took the slope deeper. It does not tie to the main cage. Not on the books. Under pasture. Rotten lagging." He looked at Vale as if the man might fine him for the sentence. Oakes wrote beneath the 10th name, "Pike. Old drift. Pasture. Not on books. Rotten." A hymn began uphill at the church. Oakes counted the measures under his breath. When they had named 29 places with no heads to fill them, he ran a line under the last and held his pencil. Near the boiler house came 3 clean raps that used the ground better than sound uses air. A pause, then 2. The women turned. Vale's hand went to his ledger. Pike's thumb found and pressed the map's crease. Oakes felt the intervals in his bones. After full dark, Oakes paced the measure from the church to the seal, counting under his breath, because numbers keep a man from praying himself hoarse. Pike came out of the lamp room with 2 pry bars and the kind of shame that looks like resolve. Jesse brought a bucket of wedges, jaw set. They worked without shout. Pike set his bar under the first crosspiece and leaned until wood surrendered. Jesse tapped wedges. Oakes recited psalm numbers to hold the count steady. He pressed his palm to the boards and felt, through timber, a sting of colder air deeper down. Whistles peeped twice at the gate, guard code for clear. Pike didn't look up. They want your back to show up easy if the boss asks. Vale arrived with quiet economy. In his hand the same printed sheet, now with a second folded over it. "Gentlemen," he said, "Judge's hand." He opened the new paper. Oakes smelled the wet still in it. "All work to cease until safety is assessed." "Cracks within a man's span," Oakes said, making record. Pike moved his bar to where timbers met old lagging the deputies hadn't bothered to shore. They sealed the obvious. Left the rot. Behind the boiler house, the ground kept a stiffness that didn't belong to clay. Oakes walked the paces and put his ear low. No tapping now. Just the smallest tension in the earth, as if a string ran under it. The first sealed timber gave with a sigh. Jesse pulled the wedge free, grinning. A guard blew one whistle, hold, and Vale unfolded the injunction farther. "I will not see you arrested. I will, however, record." They pried at the next crosspiece. The pry bar slipped and rapped Oakes's knuckle. He recorded without flourish, "Injury, slight, no blood." Vale spoke before the next surrender. "Foreman, if there is an entry not on the books you mean to test, consider whether the company will own it later." Pike looked to Oakes. "Psalm 77, Oakes said. He counted the words off silently while he leaned. The timber came. The mouth showed dark without shape. "Cold rose?" The deputies blew long, a note that means end. Vale stepped closer. "This work ceases." Oakes took up his watch and made himself obey it. He turned toward the creek. At the bend below the boiler yard, the bank clay had slumped in a shape that was no storm's work. A crescent showing fresh broken, as if from a push within. At dawn, a rainburst made the creek quick. Oakes walked to the bend and marked the rise on a root, a thumb above last night. At the mill pond, Eddie, a tin lunch pail turned once and settled. He tested the bank, leaned with his stick, and raked the pail to shore. The lid had sprung and was tied with twine. Inside, a heel of bread, a wick stub with bite marks, and a slip of paper cut from a tally sheet with grease pencil scrawled across. "Air thin." He read the words in place to feel where the hand had pressed hard and where it had hurried. Downstream, a dented helmet spun against a snag. He lifted it by the strap. The crush ran shallow where a man might have eased under timber. A thumbprint of clay crowned the ridge. He tipped it to empty water and smelled coal, old lamp oil, and the high, tinny dryness that comes from men breathing the same air too long. He logged the distances. Bend to Eddie by strides, 13. Eddie to snag, 11. Sealed mouth to bend, not by flow. The current would not deliver from the official shaft to this corner. He wrote, "Origin contradictory with company account." Men came. Jesse first, then saw the pail and a helmet, and said nothing. Oakes lifted the slip with the tip of his watch chain to avoid smearing the grease. The pencil had dragged it thin as if the writer wanted either to whisper or to shout. Letters deep as scratches. He turned the pail. No name punched there. Just a neat row of bruises where a hand had learned to rap it for attention. Luann Hart came down the path. She touched the dent with one finger and withdrew it with neatness. "You will bring it to the church," she said. Then she pressed the lunch pail lid down and tied the twine tighter. Vale arrived with courtesy made heavy by usefulness. Relief script remains available. I will record these for company effects. Oakes shook his head once. "They will be recorded," he said, and wrote in his book, "Helmet recovered, dented. Pail with note air thin. Hours since last tapping, 9. Custody maintained." Pike stood at the trestle, looking toward the pasture beyond the churchyard. He had a folded packet, cheap paper, yellowed and crisp. "Not by the shaft," he said. "Never by the shaft with a rain like this. Men send a message when a cage won't carry one." "Show me," Oakes said. Pike unfolded the packet. A seam sketch lay within, and a penciled addition in Pike's hand. The main slope ran where everyone knew. A thin vein cut off under the church pasture, a discontinued entry, lagging marked rotten. Someone had shaded a scab of soil and written air cracks. "The current there is contrary," Oakes said. "It would give up a pail around the bend." Pike nodded. "Rotten lagging," Pike said. "If air is thin, that's where it learns to be. Pasture edge. We pray there." They set off from the churchyard fence at noon. Oakes carried Pike's sketch, the lunch pail note, and the helmet. Pike brought pry bars and a shovel. Jesse shouldered 2 lamps. 2 mill men brought wedges and rough planks for shoring. From fence to the sink in the pasture, Oakes counted 47 paces, then 8 more to the slight hollow. "Rotten lagging?" Pike said, and put the bar to a gray board flush with earth. The wood answered like bread gone to crust. They pried in pairs. The first boards came like secrets a man meant to keep, but tires of keeping. Cold rose. Jesse eased a lamp into the opening. "Air smells old," he said. They widened the gap. Oakes followed, measuring the pitch by how the lamp flame leaned. He chalked the first tie with a neat one, then each after. "Count," he said. Jesse called numbers softly. The drift ran true at first, ribs regular. At the 10th tie, Pike lifted his lamp to a post where someone had made tally marks with a nail point, fresh enough that the edges still remembered light. Oakes counted the cuts. 29, neat and upright. He wrote, "Post tally 29, cut depth shallow, recent." He did not write. Number of missing equals same. Farther on the roof settled. They crawled single file until Oakes stopped where the drift narrowed to a cone of collapse. The roof met the floor in a packed throat 2 hands high, fine sifting through like sand. Lamplight broke on the wedge of clay. "Listen," Jesse breathed. They were quiet. From beyond the cone, a draft that didn't belong to the shaft they had left. Faint, clean, walking across their hands as if it had been outdoors recently. Oakes tasted creek in it. "Sink," Pike said. "The creek's undercut." They went for it. He put his shoulder to the cone and drew back as the fine slithered. "We move it wrong, and the hill sits on us." Oakes pulled the seam sketch from his pocket and set his rule from the pasture edge mark to the shaded scab. His figures matched his steps. They were where the map had promised. He wrote, "Cone, 3 feet high at center. Fines active, draft from creekside." They tried small work. A millman shaved the cone's face with a board, scooping what gave without waking what watched. Fines slid. Lagging overhead sighed and dropped dust into Oakes's hat. He removed the grit with 2 fingers and set the hat back. "If they made a tunnel, it meets us there." He pointed with the rule to a darker seam where fines had fallen faster. "We will widen to that mark and no more." They had cleared a bowl the depth of Oakes's forearm when the cone sighed and pinched narrower. The draft beyond came a degree cleaner, cold on Oakes's knuckles. He looked back toward daylight he couldn't see and forward toward air he couldn't name. "We fetch braces," he said. "Then we go through." They returned with braces at mid-afternoon. Oakes worked without speech with the men. When he had cleared enough, he lay on his side and pushed his shoulders into the opening until Clay took him firm and let him pass. The drift beyond opened to a room made by caution. 2 lamps put their small suns against the dark. Bedroll circles showed on the fines where bodies had warmed earth, then moved. Wick stubs lay scattered by a timber, tooth-marked like the one from the pail. A heel of bread sat varnished in a cloth. No voices, no men, only the proof of hours spent counting those hours. He circled, chalking posts. On the far side, the tunnel they had guessed ran on. A man-high scrape in the fines, walls polished by sleeves, knees, and hope. It ended 30 paces along at a cave-in, cramped to a wedge. The clay face wet and slick where water had learned the shortest sentence. Oakes set his hand flat to the clay and felt the hill say, "No," in its one language. "Bedroll circles," he said. "Wick ends." No bodies. Tunnel to sink. He did not say vanished. Jesse looked from the heel of bread to Oakes's hand. The boy's mouth made the shape of a question and kept it. They backed out by the numbers they had made coming in. Outside, the pasture light felt startling as a bell struck too near. Pike closed the lagging with care. By the time they crossed the churchyard, wagons had come with company paint on their sides. Vale stood with his hat brim clear of the drizzle, ledger pocket forward. He spoke to a carpenter in a low tone. The man took his measure and began to set a frame. "A public ground," Vale said when Oakes came near, "for the benefit of families. Shade, a table or two. Repairs completed." 29, Oakes answered, because a number must be spoken where language blurs. Vale inclined his head and looked past the minister toward the pasture. One heartbeat too long to be accident. He didn't ask for the helmet or the scrap. Oakes didn't offer them. He put the helmet on the vestry table and the lunch pail note into a small envelope. Wrote air thin and the hour on the outside, and stored both in the church chest under the folded christening linen. He added the seam sketch under the same lid and locked it, key on its nail like any ordinary afternoon. At sundown, the wagon set posts at the pasture edge and nailed planks into a tidy platform over the lagging that hid their work. Children came to see without knowing what they witnessed. Luann stood at the fence, shawl square, mouth kept as she had taught it. She didn't ask Oakes for the helmet. He didn't press it on her. Some weights are shared by being borne apart. He walked the trestle once more and marked the creek's rise, half a thumb with the dusk's small rain. He wrote the hour, closed the book, and let the watch tick without consulting it. On Sunday, they put up a fresh sign at the pasture. Picnic ground, company courtesy. Oakes read it as he read scripture, line upon line, then folded his hands on the rail and named distances under his breath. After service, he went to the chest, touched the helmet once to feel its honest dent, and closed the lid again as if tucking in a sick child. Through the open window, the creek kept its small black shine, speaking the one story it knew. The hill's breath taking and giving, careful as a ledger kept in someone else's pocket.